The winner is Art Carney in...
Thank you, Glenda. Ladies and gentlemen, and members of the Academy.
Art Carney won 6 Emmys playing Ed Norton. He beat Al Pacino for an Oscar. But when his famous co-star from The Honeymooners died in 1996, he said nothing, not one word. Everyone in Hollywood paid tribute. Jackie Gleason's family sent flowers. Former cast members cried on TV. Art Carney stayed silent. She had called him brilliant and gentle in her memoir. She hoped they'd talk again someday. They never did. What happened between them was darker than anyone knew. Art Carney was born on November 4, 1918, in Mount Vernon, New York. He was the youngest of 6 boys in a deeply Irish Catholic family. His father worked as a newspaperman, but what shaped Art more was the alcohol that flowed through their home like water. 3 of his older brothers were alcoholics. His father drank too. Art once said, "Most of us boys were non-smokers, but drinkers, yes." That wasn't just a comment, it was a warning. He started drinking as a teenager, not casually, not socially, but regularly. He grew up thinking alcohol was just part of life. It wasn't a matter of if he'd fall into it, but when. He had talent early on. One of his best tricks was impersonating Franklin D. Roosevelt. He didn't just sound like him, he was him. The voice, the pause, the tone. People listening to the radio thought the president was actually speaking. It got so convincing that federal agents got involved. They were worried it might cause confusion during the war. Foreign diplomats even mistook his performance for real speeches. It was dangerous, but it also made him a star. He later used that voice on radio shows, mimicking not just Roosevelt, but Churchill and Eisenhower too. By 18, Carney was already performing with Horace Heights Orchestra, thanks to his older brother. It sounded glamorous. It wasn't. His roommate was Fred Lowry, a blind whistler. He also introduced Art to morning drinking, not coffee. Gin and grapefruit juice, every day. At first, it felt like freedom. No rules, no guilt. But that freedom quickly became a cage. He was addicted before he even knew it. He remembered one moment clearly. He was too drunk during a live broadcast to even spell Tums, the sponsor's name. He slurred his way through the ad. Sponsors were furious. He left the band at 23 before they could fire him. Then came the war. August 15, 1944, his 4th wedding anniversary. He was in France with the 28th Infantry Division, serving as a machine gunner. A German mortar exploded nearby. Shrapnel tore through his right thigh. He hadn't even fired his gun yet. "Never fired a shot, and maybe never wanted to," he joked later. But the injury was no joke. His right leg ended up 3/4 of an inch shorter than his left. He limped for the rest of his life. 9 months in recovery, 1 Purple Heart, and 1 deeply wounded man. He came home with a medal, but also with scars that no one could see. His limp was obvious. The trauma wasn't. He drank more. He used barbiturates. He started taking amphetamines. The war had lasted only 2 months for him, but the effects lasted forever. He had breakdowns. He couldn't cope with pressure. And nobody called it PTSD back then, but that's what it was. One breakdown in 1965 even forced him to quit The Odd Couple. It would take him nearly 30 years after the war to finally get sober. In the late 40s, Carney was everywhere on the radio. He worked with Milton Berle, Fred Allen, Maury Amsterdam. He was the go-to sidekick, the second banana. He could do any voice, any joke. But behind the mic, he was drinking more than ever. Sometimes he slurred on air. Sometimes he blacked out. And still, they kept hiring him. His talent was too rare. Producers worked around his drinking instead of confronting it. After the war, he faced a big problem. Could a limping man succeed on television? He found a way. He had custom shoes made to balance his legs, but he didn't just hide the limp, he used it. He made it part of his comedy. His odd walks, his dance moves, they weren't random, they were survival. He turned pain into performance. His fans never knew. They just laughed. But the truth kept chasing him. The drinking got worse. He had already been on the edge with Horace Heights' band, and now his drinking was back with a vengeance. When he left the band at 23, it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he had to. He was a liability. His addiction had already burned one bridge. Many more would follow. He tried stand-up comedy. It didn't work, not because he wasn't funny, but because the stage terrified him. The crowd's faces, the silence, the pressure, it triggered his anxiety. He drank to calm himself. Then he took pills to sharpen up. Then he needed more pills just to sleep. He'd created a vicious cycle. Fear, drugs, shame, repeat. The same man who made radio stars shine couldn't handle a spotlight on his own. Even his personal life was haunted. He married his high school sweetheart, Jean Myers, in 1940. They had 3 children, Eileen, Brian, and Paul. But the marriage cracked under the weight of addiction. Art Carney almost didn't make television history because he didn't believe he belonged. In 1951, when radio writers suggested him for a sketch with Jackie Gleason on Cavalcade of Stars, Carney thought it was a mistake. Gleason was already a rising star. Carney didn't think someone that famous even knew who he was. It wasn't false modesty. He had been quietly stealing the spotlight as Newton the waiter on the Maury Amsterdam show. But he still saw himself as small-time. That mindset would shape everything that followed. Here was a man whose talent could fill a room, and yet he doubted himself every step of the way. That sketch turned into The Honeymooners, and the world met Ed Norton. His outfit, white t-shirt, unbuttoned vest, pork pie hat, became iconic. But behind the scenes, things weren't so smooth. Carney wanted perfection. He believed in rehearsing every line, every gesture, every beat. Gleason, he wanted spontaneity. He thought too much practice would ruin the magic. Carney would show up ready to rehearse. Gleason refused. So Carney built Norton's character in isolation. He even wore special shoes to hide a limp from a war injury. The silly dances, the perfect timing, that was all Carney. Rehearsing alone, driven by pressure, pain, and eventually pills. Art Carney's life during the making of The Honeymooners was anything but funny. All 39 episodes were filmed live at the Adelphi Theater in Manhattan in front of 1,000 people. That alone was pressure enough. But Jackie Gleason made things harder. He was famous for rewriting scripts just hours before showtime. He believed that rehearsing too much would ruin the spontaneity. So the cast often walked onto that stage barely knowing their lines. For Carney, it was torture. He was a perfectionist. He needed preparation. But instead, he'd get brand new lines and stage directions just before walking in front of a live audience. The anxiety was overwhelming. The cast invented secret visual signals to help each other survive. Gleason would pat his stomach when he forgot a line. Audrey Meadows would glance at the fridge when someone needed to go there. It looked smooth on screen, but backstage, Carney was barely holding it together. To cope, he turned to alcohol and pills. Anything to calm the storm in his head. When the show was canceled in 1956, it seemed like a huge blow. Ratings had crashed from number 2 in America down to number 19. But for Carney, it was actually a relief. No more last-minute rewrites, no more panic attacks before live tapings. His manager even said, "Gleason has other plans, and they don't include Carney." That's to Carney's liking, too. He finally had freedom, and he used it. In 1957, he made his Broadway debut in The Rope Dancers. He played James Hyland, a broken, alcoholic father. The play ran for 189 performances and got 6 Tony nominations. Critics loved him. They said he blended charm, weakness, and sorrow like a master. But few realized that the role wasn't much of a stretch. Carney was already drinking heavily. He had been for years. Then came his most iconic stage role. In 1965, Carney became the very first Felix Unger in Neil Simon's The Odd Couple. Opposite Walter Matthau, it was a perfect match. Matthau was messy, Carney was precise. The show exploded with success. Critics raved. Tony Randall, who later played Felix on TV, called Carney's version the first and best. Carney made Felix more than just a clean freak. He made him human. Complex, hilarious, vulnerable. And when Jack Lemmon later played Felix in the movie, even he struggled to escape Carney's shadow. But while his stage work was soaring, his personal life was crashing. By 1965, his marriage of 25 years was falling apart. He and Jean Myers had 3 children and a long history. But it couldn't survive his addictions. Carney had started drinking in his teens. By the 1960s, he was also hooked on barbiturates and amphetamines. He once admitted his old comedy partner would order gin and grapefruit juice for breakfast. It got worse over time. Jean had supported him for years, but his behavior became erratic, dangerous. She couldn't take it anymore. The marriage ended that same year, and then something even stranger happened. Carney began to become Felix Unger, literally. He developed compulsive behaviors off stage. The most disturbing was his coin stacking. He'd line up coins by size, color, and value in perfect patterns in his dressing room. If even one was out of place, he couldn't go on stage. Colleagues started noticing. They said he missed cues and delayed scenes because he couldn't stop arranging things. The line between the character and the man blurred. Felix was no longer just a role, it was a cage. By October 1965, just 7 months into The Odd Couple's run, Carney hit rock bottom. He suffered a full mental and physical breakdown and checked into a psychiatric hospital in Hartford. He stayed there for nearly 6 months. He admitted everything: the alcohol, the drugs, the breakdown. He said, "My first marriage was breaking up, and I was not in good shape." Art Carney had already proven himself on Broadway. He was brilliant as Felix Unger in The Odd Couple, earning praise from critics and even from Tony Randall, who later said Carney was the first and best Felix. But when it came time to make the 1968 film version, something devastating happened. Paramount chose Jack Lemmon instead. They said it was about box office appeal. But Carney had a different theory. He believed his recent breakdown and his public admission of addiction had made him too risky, maybe even uninsurable, for a big-budget production. That thought never left him. The film went on to make over $44.5 million and became the third highest-grossing movie of that year. Watching it succeed without him wasn't just disappointing, it haunted him. But there were signs things were getting worse before Hollywood even turned its back on him. Friends and co-workers started noticing something strange. When Carney was under stress, he started behaving like Felix Unger off stage too. He'd stack his pocket change on the dressing table in perfect little towers. Face up, largest coins on the bottom, smallest on top. It wasn't just quirky, it was obsessive. The people around him knew what it meant. He was slipping again. They could see the pattern. The more he acted like Felix, the closer he was to another breakdown. Over time, it became impossible to tell where Carney ended and Felix began. Then, in 1966, Jackie Gleason picked up the phone and called Art Carney. Carney had vanished from public life, trapped in a fog of depression and substance abuse. But Gleason wanted Ed Norton back, and that character had always lived inside Carney. Against all odds, Carney returned. And when the Honeymooners revival aired as part of the Jackie Gleason show, something magical happened. Fans lit up. Norton's quirky gestures, awkward dancing, and loyal charm were back, and they were better than ever. What no one expected was just how good Carney would be. In 1966, he won his 4th Emmy, then his 5th in 1967, then a 6th in 1968. 3 years, 3 Emmys, all while barely holding himself together. For the first time, the show added musical numbers. Carney sang, he danced, he made people laugh like nothing was wrong. But privately, he later confessed something chilling. Playing Ed Norton during that time didn't just revive his career, it saved his life. The character gave him purpose when everything else was falling apart. Still, the show's bright lights couldn't hide what was happening behind the scenes. After his stay in the sanitarium, Carney had kicked pills. But alcohol still had him in a chokehold. From 1966 to 1970, the effects were brutal. His appearance changed fast. At 48, he looked decades older. His face swelled, his hands trembled, he moved slower. Not even makeup could hide the damage. It started taking longer and longer to prepare him for each scene. By some estimates, Carney was drinking nearly a 5th of whiskey a day. That didn't include the wine at dinner or the beers between takes. His weight would swing 30 pounds in either direction within weeks. Sometimes he couldn't remember rehearsals at all. One time, co-star Joyce Randolph found him passed out cold in his dressing room. It wasn't the first time. The crew learned how to handle these emergencies quietly to protect the show's clean image. But inside, Carney was unraveling. After the 1969 season ended, Carney did something most actors in his position wouldn't even consider. He checked himself back into the same psychiatric hospital in Hartford. No scandal, no arrest, no intervention. Just a quiet, deliberate move because he knew he was in trouble. He had just won another Emmy and was still at the top of the game. But he was drinking more than ever. This second stay lasted around 4 months. He wasn't just resting, he was working. He went deep into psychotherapy. He joined group sessions that would later influence how Alcoholics Anonymous shaped its own approach. He kept journals. He picked apart his own thoughts with the same detail he gave to Norton. He called it the Irish curse, his family's pattern of alcoholism. It wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. And though he didn't get sober right away, what he learned in that hospital would help him finally quit drinking for good in 1974, during the filming of Harry and Tonto. Even as he healed, there was something he never chose to revisit: the Honeymooners itself. While Gleason and Audrey Meadows kept in touch and took part in a few reunions, Carney stayed away. No interviews, no commentaries, no nostalgic nods. When Meadows passed away in 1996, Carney didn't issue a public statement. Some called him cold for that, but to those who knew him, it wasn't about indifference, it was about survival. That chapter of his life was too closely tied to pain. In her 1994 memoir, Love, Alice, Audrey Meadows called Carney brilliant and gentle, but she admitted they were never close. She sensed he carried guilt. About what? She wasn't sure. In an old interview, she guessed that maybe he blamed himself for something during those tough filming years. Her words weren't bitter, they were sad and soft. She even thought about reaching out later in life, but she didn't. Art had already left that part of his life behind, she said, but healing his personal life was a harder battle. In 1966, Art Carney thought he was getting a second chance. A year after leaving the hospital and divorcing his first wife, Jean Myers, he married Barbara Isaac. She wasn't just anyone. She worked behind the scenes in TV and understood the pressure. Carney believed she could keep him steady. For a while, that seemed true. He quit pills. He stopped using amphetamines. He looked like a man rebuilding his life, but alcohol still had a grip on him. By 1977, the second marriage collapsed. It wasn't just another divorce, it was the final crack in a life already full of damage. Carney was in his late 50s. Most men his age were thinking about slowing down and enjoying retirement, but he was unraveling. Barbara, who had stood by him since his early recovery days in the 60s, finally gave up. She had worked on productions like the Art Carney special and believed in his talent, but she couldn't live through the cycles anymore. The promises, the drinking, the relapses. Their love had survived one breakdown in 1965. It couldn't survive another 10 years of decline. After she left, Carney fell into deep isolation. Friends said he would spend entire weekends in his apartment, surrounded by empty bottles and pill containers. He barely spoke to anyone. Sometimes he'd just talk to himself in the mirror. It was a haunting image. This was the same man who had once made America laugh as Ed Norton. Now he was completely alone. Even his children from his first marriage pulled away. They didn't know how to talk to the man he had become. When Paul Mazursky approached Art Carney to star in Harry and Tonto, the offer didn't just feel odd, it felt like a joke. Carney had spent his life making people laugh on television, not wandering cross-country with a cat in an indie film that barely had a $1 million budget. He'd only been in 2 films before, both forgettable. Now, at 54 years old, he was being asked to play a frail 72-year-old man. He turned it down more than once, calling the script a boring travel story. He said he was too young. But the truth was, years of heavy drinking had aged him fast. He was gray, balding, limping from an old war injury, and looked far older than his age. Mazursky didn't give up. He saw something in Carney others didn't: pain, loneliness, and quiet strength. The character was Carney. It took a blunt push from his longtime agent, Bill McCaffrey, to break through. "Do it. You are old." That hit hard. It was cruel, but it was real, and Carney knew it. But just when it seemed like his big chance had come, everything nearly fell apart. During one scene, Carney had to carry his cat, Tonto, up several flights of stairs. He suddenly stopped, bent over, and began vomiting something dark and grainy. Everyone froze. It looked like coffee grounds, but it was blood. Digested blood from internal bleeding. Years of alcohol abuse had caused a herniated diaphragm, and the physical strain had triggered something serious. He was rushed to a hospital in Los Angeles. Doctors warned him, "Keep drinking and you'll be dead in 6 months." Nobody outside the set knew what happened. But when Carney came back just 3 days later, he looked like a ghost. Pale, shaking, weak. The director had to rewrite scenes to reduce the physical strain. Still, Carney kept going. That near-death moment forced him to try something drastic. Antabus. It was a brutal drug. If he drank even a drop of alcohol, it would make him violently sick. His heart could race. He might vomit for hours, but he needed something that strong. He threw out every bottle in his apartment. He started avoiding restaurants, bars, even friends who drank. Sometimes he stood outside liquor stores for hours, just staring, knowing he couldn't give in. Antabus became his shield. It stopped him from destroying the best opportunity of his career. And then the unthinkable happened. At the 1975 Academy Awards, Art Carney won Best Actor. Nobody expected it, not even him. The other nominees: Jack Nicholson for Chinatown, Al Pacino for The Godfather Part 2, Dustin Hoffman for Lenny, Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express. Legends, everyone. Most of them didn't even show up because Nicholson was the clear favorite. When Glenda Jackson read Carney's name, the audience gasped. Some couldn't believe it. A man with only 2 tiny film credits had just beaten 4 icons. But success didn't erase the pain. Carney still carried deep scars. Years earlier, he had been passed over for the film version of The Odd Couple, even though he'd made the role of Felix Unger famous on Broadway. The studio chose Jack Lemmon instead. Carney always suspected his drinking and mental breakdown had cost him the part. It haunted him. Even after the Oscar, he wrestled with anxiety and regret. Friends noticed strange habits, like how he would stack coins in precise order, big ones on the bottom, small ones on top, little signs that he wasn't fully okay. The award didn't fix what was broken, but it gave him a second chance. In 1980, in a move that shocked everyone, Carney remarried his first wife, Jean Myers. They had been divorced for 15 years. Their first marriage had lasted 25 years and brought 3 children, Eileen, Brian, and Paul. But addiction had destroyed it. Carney had checked into a psychiatric hospital in the mid-60s. After the divorce, he married again, but it didn't last. Still, he and Jean stayed in touch for the kids. Art Carney was a star who never quite felt at home in the spotlight. Even though the Honeymooners made him a household name in the 1950s, he walked away from that fame and never looked back. When the TV industry started doing reunion specials in the 1970s and 1980s, Carney was the one big name missing. Jackie Gleason was there, Audrey Meadows was there. But Carney, he said no, every time. He could have made millions, but he refused. When asked why, he would just say things like, "It was a great time, but it was only a time. I don't live in the past." People around him said it wasn't about money or pride. He just didn't want to be Ed Norton again, not even for a night. His manager had said back in 1957 that Carney was ready to fly on his own. But over the years, it became something deeper. Carney once said, "Sometimes things end, and you don't realize the chapter has closed until you look back and realize no one turned the page." That's how he saw The Honeymooners, a closed book. Then came something even harder to explain. On February 3, 1996, Audrey Meadows died of lung cancer. She was 73. The entertainment world reacted instantly. Tributes came pouring in. Everyone said something. Everyone except Art Carney. Not a single quote, not one sentence. Fans were stunned. Even Gleason, who had died years earlier in 1987, had praised his co-stars during his final interviews. But Carney stayed completely silent. Some people called it cruel, others said it was cold. But those who knew Carney thought there was more to it. In her last interview, Meadows had said she hoped they would talk again someday. She didn't think they were bitter with each other. She said, "Sometimes silence is louder than an argument," and maybe it was. She believed Carney blamed himself for something she never fully explained. She thought it hurt him to be reminded of who he used to be, That silence might not have been rejection, it might have been regret. After winning the Oscar for Harry and Tonto in 1975, Carney pulled even further away from the spotlight. He quit drinking, started antibus treatment, and lived a quiet life far from Hollywood. He acted in a few more films, Firestarter and The Muppets Take Manhattan in 1984, but never chased fame again. His last film came in 1993 in Last Action Hero. His final line in the movie, "I'm outta here," that was the last time audiences ever saw him on screen. While other old stars showed up at conventions and retrospectives, Carney stayed away. He didn't give interviews, he didn't pose for cameras, he didn't want to be remembered as a star, he wanted to be left alone. He remarried his first wife, Jean, in 1979 after a divorce and a brief second marriage. They lived together in Westbrook, Connecticut. He spent his days gardening, reading, and enjoying the quiet. Friends said he wasn't bitter, he was finally calm. And that calm had taken decades to find. On November 9, 2003, 5 days after his 85th birthday, Art Carney died peacefully in his sleep. Natural causes, no scandals, no drama, just a quiet end to a once chaotic life. He had stayed sober for nearly 30 years. He kept using antibus to make sure he never slipped back. His funeral was private, just like the way he lived. He was buried in Riverside Cemetery in Old Saybrook, next to Jean, who would pass away in 2012. His grandson, Devin Carney, went into politics and now serves in the Connecticut General Assembly. The family name lived on. And while Art Carney never did embrace the Honeymooners in public again, those close to him said he made peace with it before the end. He may never have said it out loud, but the pain had faded. The demons were gone. What remained was a man who had finally found a way to live with himself and leave quietly on his own terms.